Hello, God bless you. How are you today? So happy to be here, and we are going to learn about relationships between individuals and groups. And in intercultural education, there is a system that was created by Gert Hofstede, who is from the Netherlands. And it's a very interesting way of approaching learning about various cultures and what we might expect. And maybe you've heard of this before. Once again, we can't judge individuals and groups. This is just more or less a guide. Some of it may be true, but just because you meet someone from one particular country, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to act in a way you might expect. So we're going to talk about cultural dimensions. And today we're going to talk about actually five. One is power distance. The other one is individualism and collectivism. The other one is masculinity and femininity. And other one is uncertainty avoidance. And the other one has to do with the time orientation of a culture. So we're going to talk about these five cultural dimensions that Hofstede examined. And once again, it's kind of a guide if you have relationships and you're trying to gauge a situation. And he has assigned ratings, you might say, that are associated with different countries. So let's talk about what power distance is. And power distance is the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. So this, in a much easier way, means where a person fits in relationship to the leader of a group. So relationship that you may have with or maybe you don't have with the leader of a group. Now, an example of a low power distance would be in the United States and Canada, where there is a desire to connect with people. That's not to say that it doesn't exist in other countries, but sometimes position and title and connection maybe is not so important. Also, when we think of power distance, we also think of the expectation that citizens, people of the country, may have about relationships. So in the US and Canada, you see this desire to be more on an equal level. There can be power distance. I mean, if you meet the president of a company or the administrator of a school, you're going to show respect for that person. But you may also feel able to speak to that person easily. And titles don't necessarily mean all that much always. So sometimes I like to give an example of, my father, who was a pharmacist and president of a drug company. So he was the president of a drug company, but he was there was very low power distance in the way he approached his relationships. So he was, born in America, raised here. So not that means there's going to be low power distance. I don't want to say that all Americans are in this way, people that are here. But he had very low power distance oriented. So, what does that mean? Well, the workers in his business, they were uh, always able to talk to him. He always put people at ease. His position was not a position where he felt people, needed to respect him in an extra special way. He related with all people, regardless of where they were from, their level of education. He also was known for his benevolent work for the poor and needy. So he associated with people of all walks of life. So power distance really was not a big part of who he was. I remember as a little boy, I would be driving with him, and he had a very big car. And so we would be driving, and he would see someone that maybe looked like they were having a hard time, and he would always say, poor soul. Like he really cared about other people. He didn't dismiss people. So the power distance was very, very low in his case. So people could speak with him, and he felt comfortable speaking with other people. Now, so the US and Canada, normally low power distance, not always. But on the other end, we might look at the country of Japan and the country of Singapore. And in these countries, sometimes the power distance may be very high. So if you are the president of a company or a president of a university, people will look upon you very differently. Like, oh, he's the president. Oh, I better do what I'm supposed to do. He's the president of this company. So, there's more of a separation between that person and maybe some other people who have more humble beginnings. So this can create a challenge when in a lot of different settings. If you are a minister or a teacher or a professor, and you're in a classroom with you may have some people where the country they come from, there's a low power distance, like countries like lower power distance than America, like Sweden and Norway, where people are very much working to be pretty much on the same level. So you may have a student from that country, from Norway or Sweden, but then in the class you may have a student from where there is a high power distance. So sometimes this happens also in Korea. So now if someone maybe does not understand the dynamic, maybe that student might say, why? Maybe the student from Norway is speaking with the teacher in a very familiar way. Oh, why is he speaking to that teacher in such a familiar way? Those of us, and I'm sure most of you, are very sophisticated about how sometimes times have changed. But in our cultural backgrounds, I was raised in America, but I was always raised to really respect teachers and the office of teacher. So I was always, yet I was also raised with the ability to feel that freedom to speak, with a teacher. So whatever setting, you're in, it's important to think about that. So I think of the country of Guatemala, which also has a very, very high power distance thing. There can be people in charge, and those people are considered, wow, they're the leaders. And if you're not a part of that group, you have to maybe submit to that group, the higher level group. So this isn't to say people don't speak and exchange information, but it's something to be aware of, because if you're wherever you are, your country, and you come to America and you observe, people being very familiar, like, why is he talking to that teacher so easily? Well, because that low power distance can happen. So, and once again, we can't generalize. It's not true of every situation. Hofstede, as a theorist, has created these cultural dimensions as kind of an easy way to look at different cultures and how they may connect, and how people from different cultures may react to one another. So, the other cultural dimension I think is very interesting is, of course, individualism and collectivism. And those of you who have studied culture probably have noticed this. In America, Australia, Great Britain, a lot of times individualism is honored, and it is in fact encouraged. I know when I was a little boy going to school, you would always see teachers wanting to know your opinion. So from the time I was a little boy, I was made to feel my opinion means something, that I can have ideas, I can develop ideas. In fact, it's almost like many teachers want you to have that individualistic way. So sometimes it can go to an extreme where a person can be so individualistic that they cannot relate to other people, they cannot relate to a group, and sometimes that can be very difficult. So if you're on a missions team and you have an American on that team, not every American is this way, you might find the American, maybe they're talking a lot, or maybe they want to be heard and share this and share that. It may be hard for you to be around that. And you might think, wow, that American is so rude. He is talking so much, or she is wanting their ideas to be heard all the time. So you might want to show some understanding and realize that that can be a cultural thing, that maybe the way they were raised, they were taught that they should be that way. So on the other hand, when we look at a collectivist situation where the group becomes more important than the individual, I know I am very collectivist oriented. Although I grew up in an individualistic kind of way, I have adapted and adopted a lot of the collectivist ways, thinking of the group first. In other words, I am not important, but the group is important. How will my action impact another member of the group? Will I insult someone? Will I cause someone to have more work to do? Will I do something that could offend someone by thinking of my own, what I perceive as my own interest? So being aware of this collectivist and individual thing is so important, and it also impacts communication styles. So, for instance, sometimes in certain Korean situations, you will see a lot of posing of questions. So if the group is deciding to do something or what should be done, a lot of questions are asked for many reasons. One, is it okay with people within the group? Are we going to offend anyone? Are we going to make the right decisions to carry on? Are we going to do anything that will offend the group? Are we going to do anything that could embarrass someone in the group? So there are all these considerations when it comes to communication. And actually they are based, when I see the collectivist stuff, I think that's really based on really, really good values of, being interested in harmony and getting along. Some of it's Confucian in basis. And a lot of, I think, Confucian ideals are very in keeping with some Christian ideals. So, as Christian intercultural educators, I think this is God can use the Confucian way in a big way, in a good way, of course. So, it's so important to be conscious of this. Now, collectivism, you will see in Singapore, also Hong Kong, Mexico. One of my classmates in the doctoral program, his family is originally from Mexico. He did his research on admission standards of so-called Latino students, Latina students, Chicano, whatever term you're comfortable with, and how they succeed in many different Christian universities. And one of his findings was if there's kind of a family orientation, so there's kind of this group orientation that people feel very comfortable with. Sometimes here in the LA area, I will see, you see individuals or couples, whatever, walking, friends walking, but sometimes I have noticed maybe people that could be of Mexican descent, not always, but I will see a whole family walking together. I'll see the parents, the children. So that's something to be really mindful of. And of course, there's security in being in a group. So important to know these differences. I traveled to England about a year or so ago, and I was speaking to a group there. And although some people compare America and England as being similar, I did find it a lot different than America. And I did see some of the individualism that I see in America, but there were certain other aspects of the culture that seemed a little different to me. I really, really felt like a foreigner there, even though I speak English and I do have some English ancestry in my family. I definitely felt like a foreigner, and people were kind and welcoming and loving, but I had to use my intercultural education to be able to kind of blend in, maybe that's not the right word, understand the whole style there. And remember, at one time, America and England, even though we're certainly friendly to one another and countries get along, but we were at war a long time ago. So, many of my ancestors were in the American Revolutionary War on the American side. So sometimes, even though the war was fought so long ago, I can't help but think of, the English, we were at war. And once again, most people they think America, England, almost the same, but we were at war at one time. So I have to consider that if I feel certain thoughts and feelings about that relationship, the love of Christ is the answer, and remembering that's in the past. It's important to remember history, important to know what happened, the bad and the good. And sometimes there can be a lot of bad, but God wants reconciliation, in my opinion, forgiveness, and sometimes even talking about these things can bring about reconciliation. Not saying it didn't happen. Some people say, that stuff didn't happen in the war. But sometimes talking about it in a loving, kind way is a way to transcend the issues that could be there in country-to-country relationships that would be reflected in people that live in those countries. So that's something to keep in mind. So this third cultural dimension, masculinity, femininity, I want you to think about those two terms. And it doesn't really have much to do with masculine and feminine, like male and female, but it has to do with how traditional values are expressed. So in certain quote unquote masculine cultures, once again, that's not like a male macho thing. It has to do with just kind of a style of communication and relationship. So we look at Austria, Italy, and Japan, for instance. There could be the potential, and I'm not saying everyone is like this, okay? I'm not saying everyone is like this, but sometimes there could be the potential for some harsh communication. And that can be true of every culture, every country, but this has been recognized by Hofstede, so I'm sharing his theory. And in terms of femininity, we look at Sweden, Norway, and Netherlands, and this would be in communication more of a, shall we say, relational, gentle way. So, and once again, if you encounter someone who may represent a very harsh way of speaking or a very strong, really direct way of speaking, once again, if you are to be practicing intercultural finesse in what I would consider a Christian way, we need to try to understand that style. So if we hear that style, even though it might, oh, why is that person talking that way, or so harshly, or so strongly, or without sensitivity, we still need to show love and appreciation and understanding that maybe that's just the way the person, their parents raised them, or some parts of culture maybe. We can't always just judge people. We have to keep communication open. Some of us may not be able to accept that style. And if that's the way you are, I'm not saying, some people approach culture and communication differently. If there is some pain between two countries, some people just cannot, they're not ready to communicate with someone from that other country. It just happens that way. And so I'm not judging people either way. I'm just saying we need to be aware of people's backgrounds a little to help understand who people may be. So I think understanding comes from communication, even sometimes if the communication is painful. And I, at least as a Christian, I feel reconciliation and showing love in relationships is very important. Sometimes it's very hard. You may see a face or some situation or a religious group or something that may, I don't know, I'm afraid, or and when that happens to me, I just say, God, I say a prayer, let me show the love of Christ in my communication. Let me forgive and let me do what I can do to improve that relationship. Some people don't want to forgive. That's up to the person. So I'm not saying you have to be that way, but I know for me, I do what I can. So this is what we're trying to say. So love in relationships, showing the love of Christ is so important. Now, the next cultural dimension, uncertainty avoidance. Now, low uncertainty avoidance we would see in Singapore, Jamaica, and Denmark. And I also see it sometimes China too. It's a situation where we may not know the schedule. We may not know what's going to happen. Okay, the unknown. We may not know what's going to happen the next minute, but we're comfortable with that. We say in English, go with the flow. It's like, well, if this happens, oh well, that's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. But in some cultures, for instance, where time is very important, keeping an appointment. You look at Greece, Portugal, Japan, United States, uh, Korea. Also, we want to know like what if we have an appointment, is someone going to be there at 6 o'clock? And and then if someone walks in at 8 o'clock, it may create a problem because it could show disrespect. I expected you at 6 o'clock and you weren't here. Where were you? So, and also concern, because if you're a member of a group and people care about you in the group, they are going to say, well, are you okay? Did something happen? Were you in a car accident? Were you sick? Do you need something? So it's not selfish. Sometimes it's a little selfish, like, where is he? But sometimes it's legitimate caring. I care about this person in my group. What happened? Or did something, is there some issue? Someone heard about something? Are they trying to make a statement? We don't always know. So I think being able, we talked earlier in the class about Milton Bennett's theories and about different stages of understanding other cultures through experience. And I think it's important to be mindful of, respecting what the story may be. Maybe some people don't care much about time. And I've taught students from over 30 countries, and I know, sometimes you see students, I'm not saying it's because of their culture necessarily, because a lot of people want to be on time, but sometimes it's just the way it is, And so as Christian intercultural educators, we do need to be understanding. In some, and I won't generalize, but maybe churches in Nigeria or Kenya, relationship is very important. So maybe you're on the way to church, but you meet someone who has a need, or you want to acknowledge that person and talk to that person, but you may be late for church. But your motive is pure. You want to show respect and love and connection in relationships, but you may be late, for church. So we cannot always judge. I know it's hard, but if you want to have high intercultural ability, we need to not judge it. If we are a time-oriented culture, you might say we can't always judge people if they're late or think badly of them. It may be just the way they were raised. So just like when you were a child and maybe you made some mistakes or you weren't following you didn't see things the way your parents saw them. You listened to your parents, you love your parents, but your parents always understand you. They say, that's my daughter, that's my son. Oh, he's still young, he's still learning, I will forgive him and it's okay. So we need to almost have that feeling, not be paternalistic or condescending, you might say, but we need to show that love and understanding. And everyone has been late sometime in their life, or everyone has made some kind of a mistake. So I think Jesus wants us to be true and honest and not be hypocritical. So I think forgiveness is really important. And in intercultural settings, I told that story in another class about that professor who wanted his schedule in China, and then he got a little impatient. You have to be so careful. You do not want to destroy relationships. Or when I was talking about Lilias Horton Underwood, the early missionary to Korea, she was very, very careful about her reactions to people. She did not want to hurt the reputation of Jesus Christ, and she was a representative of Jesus Christ. So we must be very careful of how we are representing our King Jesus. we need to remember that. Do we want to be known as helpful, kind, loving Christians, or do we want to be known as judgmental Christians? I want to be known as a kind and loving Christian, not someone who judges and finds fault. So that's part of my philosophy toward intercultural education and intercultural communication. So I appreciate your listening, and we've had a very good discussion. And there is a Hofstede chart where it has all different kinds of ratings of all of these levels of approach to collectivism, individualism, uncertainty avoidance, and the other dimensions. So we'll show you that chart, and that will help you gauge, get an idea, and then you'll say to yourself, well, if I'm going to Argentina, how might people act in comparison to the way I was raised? So once again, it's not 100%, but it gives us a little guideline, a little guidepost. So showing you this chart, I think, will be very helpful. So thank you so much. God bless you. And we just appreciate your listening. And thank you so much. God bless.